The Payout, written by Dave Haddock. Shaw was already 10 minutes late. The bay was dark, empty. Sully passed the time scanning the Hurston spectrum for any kind of alert or notification. It was quiet. The announcer was cheerfully explaining how worker productivity was up over this past quarter, leading to a 2% profit growth. Finally, the door to the hall slid open, spilling light inside. Sully ducked behind a terminal. It was Shaw, strolling in like nothing was wrong. "About time," Sully muttered as he stepped out. "Hey, when I'm on the clock, you get my time when I want to give it." Shaw popped a stim and held his arms out expectantly. "So?" "Turns out my package had a little extra cargo in there, about 10 jars of Widow Extra." Shaw was silent. "You know anything about that?" "Why the hell would I?" he replied derisively. "Only time that cargo was out of my sight was when you were moving it." "Well, I ain't in the habit of swapping boxes." Shaw took a drag off the stim. "Bring the stuff back and I can see if anyone's light on some Widow." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because Hurston was all over the drop. They got it now." Shaw leaned back against the wall and sighed. "Guess you're screwed then." "It wasn't my stuff." "It is now." Shaw took a last puff on the stim and ejected the spent cartridge. "Sorry, Sully. Think it might be time to disappear again." "Can you bring up my ship?" "Yeah, sure." Shaw walked over to one of the terminals and booted it up. After several load screens, he accessed the hangar manager and punched some commands. His expression darkened. Sully noticed. "Oh, come on, what now?" "There's a landing lock on your ship." Shaw started punching some other commands. Suddenly, he stopped, then ripped the power cable out of the wall. The terminal went dead. "Security flagged me asking for your location. You gotta go, now." Sully started heading for the door. Shaw jogged after him. Once outside, they looked up and down the empty hall. "One more thing," Shaw turned to Sully once he was satisfied the hall was empty. "You drop me to Hurston. You're dead an hour later. Clear?" Sully stared at him, shocked. "Good." Shaw took off and left Sully alone in the hall. Sully backed up and headed into the main atrium of Archimedes' flight. A handful of security officers suddenly appeared in the entrance. They pushed past Sully and unslung rifles as they moved towards the hangars. He quickly pulled on his protective gear and set out into the street. With his ship impounded, his options were dwindling. He could try and find another ride off-world, but he'd have to go through customs to get out. With security locking down Archimedes' flight, it was unlikely he'd even make it to customs. That left fleeing the city. If he could get to some other town, maybe there'd be another way to get off the planet. Roving beams of sunlight cut through the dark clouds to shine on the passing city below. The Hurston Dynamics building receded in the distance, its top disappearing into the rolling clouds. The train quietly sailed along the elevated rails, heading into one of the residential zones. Leavesden Square had always been one of Lorville's more depressing housing blocks. The sterile grey halls and stairwells looked more like a fortress than a home. Sully watched the dark buildings approach, pinpoints of light visible from the narrow windows. Growing up in this hellhole, he knew exactly how violent the towers could be. Clearly not much had changed in the past 5 years. In fact, Leavesden actually looked worse. For that reason, leaving Lorville had never been in question. When he finally found a way out, talking his way into a trainee position on a scrap hauler, he didn't hesitate. He'd left family, friends, Carla, but he had to. He couldn't live on this godforsaken planet one more day. Now he was going back, and it wasn't a prospect he was necessarily looking forward to. Sure, he'd thought about coming back, see if Carla could finally cut herself loose of this place, but he knew she wouldn't. She had too many ties. She'd never have that urge to see what the universe had to offer. Sully glanced at the other passengers in the train. Clustered, dirt-covered workers fresh off 12-hour shifts in the munitions plants or sledging rock or whatever. He knew he was looking at the broken. He didn't even pity them anymore. They pissed him off. He wanted to smack them, tell them to wake up and realise that they're slaves, but he knew how they'd respond. They'd mumble something about life being hard everywhere, or some similar nonsense. The train pulled into the Leavesden station. His dread about coming back here was almost as bad as his gnawing fear of Hurston's security. Almost. The doors opened and Sully filed out. He walked through the common area between the 4 monolithic buildings. Concentric concrete circles descended into the ground into a rusted playground. A group of kids sat there, glaring at Sully as he approached, their arms and faces bare like some kind of brazen, but stupid, act of defiance. Their skin was already showing discoloration from the toxins in the air. Sully knew if they stood up, it meant a fight, so he kept his pace even. The kids watched him as he passed. One of them leaned back and grinned, displaying a patch cheaply sewn into his shirt. Civilian Constable Service. Hurston's eyes, ears, and, if the situation called for it, enforcers recruited from the civil population. They were the security cannon fodder, rats who'd sell out fellow workers for a pat on the head. Sully kept his head down and kept walking. The kids glanced at each other, clearly deciding what to do, but then went back to their hushed conversation. Sully continued to the atrium of Tower B, gave a quick check on the kids to be safe, then brought up the directory on the wall terminal. He scrolled down until he found Kagan in the registry and punched the code. Yeah, an older but still familiar voice murmured through the tinny speaker. Joe, Sully said as he leaned close. It's Sully. Then nothing. For a full minute, Sully just stood there, waiting. He knew this was a bad idea. The door buzzed. Joe Kagan looked old. It had only been 5 years since Sully had last seen him, but he looked like it had been 10. Still had that focused look in his eye. He looked warier, sure, but there was still that intensity. They'd first met in the halls of Tower B when they were 8 years old. Joe's family had just moved in after his dad got transferred to a new dig site, and a group of the older kids were welcoming him to the floor. Joe was about 30 kicks into the beatdown when Sully came charging in with a punch that knocked Micah Rogers out cold. That was Sully's one good shot. He quickly joined Joe on the bottom of the kicking pile. Needless to say, they'd stuck together ever since. As they got older, they shared a defiant streak. Whatever trouble they got into, it was always worth it if it resulted in those sacred words. Make Hurston pay. It took over 10 years of being inseparable to finally figure out what divided them. Joe decided that pranks and sabotage were pointless if they didn't coincide with the real efforts to change. Sully just liked pissing people off. The night before Sully took off from Lorville, they'd argued again. Sully called Joe delusional, Joe called him a coward. Now, Sully was sitting across from his old friend in the same 2-room apartment his parents had occupied. The walls were covered in historical revolutionaries. Some bizarro music played from his speakers. Joe was in an old chair, just staring at Sully. How are your parents? Sully finally said. They died. Oh, Sully settled back. Damn, sorry. Silence again, except for that dreadful music. So you still fighting the good fight? Sully said with a chuckle. We're petitioning to try and get Hurston to authorise a workers' council to oversee safety conditions. Sully couldn't stifle a laugh. Joe shook his head. What do you want, Sully? I need a hand getting out of the city. You got legs? Walk. I need to get out quietly. Joe stood up and walked to the kitchen where some water was boiling. He made tea and coughed slightly. Let me see if I got this. You vanish for 5 years, then pop up, clearly in trouble, and expect me to help? Kinda, yeah. What did you do? Does it matter? Joe slammed down the mug. The handle broke off. He looked at it for a second and tossed it in the sink. What did you do? Joe reiterated, regaining his sullen composure. I was running some cargo into the city. There was a mix-up with the packages and I got nabbed with some nasty stuff. But it wasn't mine, I swear. So you're just a straight-up criminal now? I was bringing in clothes, some hydroponic supplies, simple stuff to make people's lives better. But you aren't, Joe rubbed his temples. You still don't get it, do you? Smuggling in contraband isn't making anyone's lives better. It's putting them on a razor's edge and giving Hurston the evidence to crack down even harder when they get caught. Sure, because your petition's really going to change things, Sully snapped back. I'll bet the execs are laughing their asses off. They fell silent again. Look, I need your help, Sully said, his voice calm again. Help me and I'll never see you again. Joe thought for a few moments. I can't, he finally said. I know you couldn't care less, but we're trying to change things here. I can't get my people mixed up in smuggling, I'm sorry. Sully stood and walked to the window. Though he wasn't surprised by Joe's response, the walls of his situation felt like they were closing in. He couldn't hide out in the city for long. Not now. He looked out the window, down at the common area between the towers. Hurst and security were talking to the CCS kids. They pointed to Tower B. All of the security turned towards the tower. "Shit," Sully muttered. "What?" Joe asked as he came rushing up to the window. He followed Sully's gaze. "Shit." Joe rushed to one of his closets and pulled out some new coats, goggles and gloves. "Here," he tossed them to Sully. "So you'll help me?" "I can't get you out of the city, but I can buy you some time to get away." Joe pulled the front door open. "You remember the old stairwell where Two-Tone used to deal out of?" "Yeah," Sully replied, quickly pulling on the new clothes. "Whole thing's been condemned, so they cut off the power to the cameras. That'll take you all the way down. Slip out the back and make a run for it." "All right, thanks." Sully paused at the door. He held his hand out. "It was good to see you." Joe hesitated, then shook it. "Let me know if you ever start to care," he said. Sully took off down the hall. The building's intercom crackled to life as he ran. "Attention, Leavesden Square Tower residents. This is Sergeant McManus, Hurst Security. We have reason to believe that a dangerous criminal has entered your building. We will be enacting security protocols to secure all residents until a proper search can be conducted." All the apartment doors suddenly latched shut as automatic locks engaged. Any tenants caught outside will need to provide authorised identification. Sully hit the doorway to the back stairwell. As it swung open, he was slammed in the face with a wall of rank odour. Years of mould, dirt and grime were compounded with the remnants of whoever had been using the stairwell for a toilet. He pulled his protective hood closer to his face and descended into the pitch-black stairwell. Floor after floor passed. The decrepit state of the stairs meant he had to take each step carefully, and more than once almost slipped off something that he was grateful not to see. He could hear the heavy footsteps moving through the halls outside. A few times a Hurst security would venture a look into the stairwell, but they never lingered. One glance at the state of it was enough to convince them that no one in their right mind would be in there willingly. Sully finally reached the bottom floor and moved to the exit that let out into the back of the tower. He pushed the door open and slipped out. There weren't any security in sight, so he started to hustle off towards another one of the tower blocks. That's when he almost ran into one of the CCS kids. This was the older one who'd proudly displayed his badge, but, thanks to Joe's new clothes, he didn't recognise Sully. "Hey, the building's on lockdown." "Oh yeah, I know. I already talked to security. They cleared me to go." The kid studied Sully. He started to raise his mobi-glass to make a call. Sully hit him and ran. He didn't glance back until he'd made it to the next resident tower. Security were absolutely swarming the building he'd just left. They'd even called in some hovers to watch it from the air. He knew he was running out of time.
Little Nord Riding Hood was on her way to Grandma's house. Upon arriving at her house, she called, "Grandma, are you home?" "Yes, dear. I'm on my laptop in bed." Upon seeing her grandma, she exclaimed, "Oh, Grandma, what long fingers you have." "Oh, the better to browse the internet, my dear." "Oh, Grandma, what powerful VPN protection you have." "Oh, the better to browse safely, my dear." "Oh, Grandma, what big eyes you have." "Oh, the better to enjoy my greater access to the sites I want to visit, my dear." "But seriously, get NordVPN or I will eat you." The moral of this story is that there are some great deals on NordVPN, and using it can improve your internet privacy, safety, and give you more access to the content you want to see. Get it from the links below. Every month we have a ship giveaway for April 2023. It's for a Drake Vulture, the light salvage ship. This will enable you to take to the stars, find wrecks and strip them, as well as craft some useful items with its onboard dispensary. It comes with lifetime insurance and a Star Citizen game package as well. All you need to get into the game, and all you have to do to be in for a chance of winning that, is comment on any of my videos made during April. Also, please bear in mind that there are scammers about in YouTube. If you see in the comments below someone trying to get you to go onto Telegram, or someone not using my main account, which is the account I'm making videos on now, then they are a scammer pretending to be me or someone else, and just be safe on YouTube's. If you would like to further support the channel, please consider subscribing. You can become a Patreon, you can use the YouTube join button as well. That goes an extra mile to help support us and enables us to produce Star Citizen content every day. And that's down to you guys helping support us. So genuinely, thank you from the bottom of my little BoredGamer heart.